Today's Meet the Plant episode is all about the classic, covetable, and completely worth the hype genus Hoya. We will talk about care needs, how to propagate. I'll mention some do's and don'ts, and stay tuned for the end when I give tips on how to make your Hoya flower. If you clicked on this video today, then you are either a member of my family or you are one of the many plant lovers who are obsessed with the Hoya. Hoya are classic plants for good reason. They are extremely long-lived, they can grow to be quite large, and if all the stars are aligned, they put off beautiful waxy flower clusters. Hoya are considered vining plants. They have thick, waxy, almost succulent-like leaves. And if all the conditions are right, they have also thick, waxy, gorgeous, almost porcelain-like clusters of very fragrant flowers. Hoya is a genus that has over 500 recognized species, so it's really quite large and quite varied. Hoya is a member of the Apocynaceae family, which are flowering plants. You may also have heard it referred to as wax plant, referring to the leaves, or porcelain plant, referring to the flowers. Hoya species are native to many Asian countries, such as Malaysia, Thailand, India, but a number of species can also be found in Australia. As far as care goes, I'm going to speak today in rather general terms. As I said, there are over 500 species, and of course there are going to be some variabilities in care needs of each one. In general, I would rate the Hoya about a 3 on a scale of 1 to 5 in difficulty in care. So it's really not your most challenging plant, but there are certain conditions that you really need to meet in order to provide your Hoya its best life. Let's start with light. Hoya are light lovers. They like an abundance of bright, indirect light. Even though they have these thick, waxy leaves, they are not succulents, and they really can't take a lot of direct light. My Hoya are all sitting in either east-facing or south-facing windows. And so they do get a fair amount of direct light, but not all day. The Hoya would not do well in a west-facing window, for instance. Hoya are definitely not suited for low light areas. You wouldn't want to put a Hoya in an east-facing window or deep in your room far away from the windows. So an abundance of bright, indirect light. As I detailed in my video from last week, watering is one of the very most important things we do for our plants. Hoya prefer to dry out moderately between waterings. Now, you will read the gamut from let your Hoya go months and months without watering to water your Hoya regularly and fully. I would say find a middle ground. An underwatered Hoya will have wrinkly leaves. A severely overwatered Hoya will develop a condition called edema. And edema is identified by brown spots on the leaves. That happens just prior to the leaves going mushy and the plant perishing from its roots, basically drowning. I have a plant in my collection that did have edema that luckily I saved from that. And I have another Hoya that I am currently rehabbing because it got even past the point of that to the mushy leaves. I will show you all of those next week when I do part 2 of this video talking about all of my favorite varieties. Another critical aspect of Hoya care is the soil and the pot. Hoya like to dry out between waterings. So you want a well-draining mix rather than a mix that holds on to a lot of water. So you're going to want a lot of amendments in your soil, meaning orchid bark and perlite and things that give it an airy, well-drying nature. You're also going to want a pot that has drainage holes. The roots on a Hoya are really rather delicate and easily damaged, and they don't want to sit in water. They will rot if they stay wet. Because of that, it's really important that you have your Hoya in a substrate that is well draining and your pot does not hold on to a lot of excess moisture. Hoya can be really expensive. If you've been shopping for Hoya, some of the more uncommon species are really expensive. The very best way to get new plants at the lowest cost is to propagate. Propagate through cuttings of your own plants or sharing cuttings with your friends. I have 2 cuttings that I'm propagating right now that my niece sent me. This one is the Hoya Chelsea, and remember, I'll talk about all different varieties in next week's video, but I just want to show you 2 different methods of propagating. This one is propagating in water. Now, Hoya vines have a lot of nodes on them. They're very evident, the little nubby portions on the stem. That's what's going to grow into a root. So if you're doing it in water, you want to make sure you have a few of those under the water. And as you can see, this one is rooting really quite well. Another method I have used with success in propagating Hoya is propagating them in a propagation box. This one I'm using in sphagnum moss, and I don't use sphagnum moss anymore in my plant growing. I'm trying to use up what I have. But what I've done is just laid this vine down in the wet moss, and I'm creating actually a lot of different roots on different aspects of the stem. And then when I'm ready to plant this plant, I will put it in a pot. Those roots will all separately move down into the soil or substrate. And then I'm going to have a lot more growth points. So it's just a completely different way of doing it, but both I have had great success with. Hoya tend to be very easy to propagate plants. Well, many of us love Hoya for the gorgeous foliage and the way that they grow and they climb. The holy grail of the Hoya is the flower. Each species of Hoya has a distinct flower with a distinct fragrance. And honestly, it's really exciting when your Hoya decides to flower because it doesn't do it on a very predictable schedule. It doesn't seem to be related to the season, and it tends to be just a great feeling of success when it happens. There are 2 schools of thought in terms of how to prompt flowering out of your Hoya. The first school of thought is the happy Hoya. The happy Hoya has all of its needs met. Conditions are near perfect. So to create the happy Hoya, you would want to give the Hoya abundant indirect light. You would want to keep the roots snug, allow the plant to dry out moderately between watering, and maintain a normal fertilization schedule. Based on all of that, the theory goes then your Hoya will flower. The second school of thought is the I'm about to die Hoya, meaning that a Hoya who is stressed and thinks that it is going to die is going to do all it can to procreate. And to prompt that, you would withhold water for 4 to 6 weeks. You would keep them out of light or give them less light. You don't want to kill the plant, you just want it to think that it's dying. And perhaps even repot the plant, put it in a bigger pot than it was previously in. Neither one of these methods is scientifically proven to be better than the other. What I would suggest is that you pick your lane and you decide how it is that you want to treat your Hoya. I tend to be a compassionate plant caregiver, and so I prefer the Happy Hoya method. And I just take care of my Hoya because, like I said, I think they're absolutely beautiful on their own right. And I have been blessed with some blooms, and it is completely amazing and lovely. If you have been going about the happy Hoya route and nothing is happening, why then you can take on an experiment with, I would say, one of your more substantial plants, more waxy leaved plants, and one that you're willing to perhaps cause stress and strain to, and see if that makes a difference for you. If you've done it one way or the other and your plant is abundantly blooming, I would love to know. Leave me a comment below and let's chat about the best methods for creating blooms with your Hoya. Let's move on to do's and don'ts. The number one don't is don't cut the long tendrils. Hoya are vining plants and they tend to shoot out a long leafless tendril and then develop leaves and perhaps flowers on those tendrils. So you don't want to trim those back thinking that it's just a leafless extra on the plant. That is actually how this plant grows. And these tendrils are reaching out for something to cling onto. Number two, do procrastinate repotting. Hoya prefer to be root bound. Remember I said that their roots are really rather delicate and they don't mind being crowded in a pot. You can usually leave your Hoya in the same pot for a couple of years, provided you are still fertilizing through the growing season, then the plant will be just fine and you can skip out on some work. Don't use a foliar fertilizer. It's become rather popular lately. I've seen it all over social media to use orchid spray to help to promote flowering on your Hoya. If you look at the plant botanically, it has thick, waxy leaves. These leaves are fairly impenetrable. You are not going to be able to provide any sort of nutrients through the leaves. Hoya, like most plants, take up their nutrients through the roots. So don't spend your money or your time spraying your plant with any sort of foliar fertilizer. Fertilize in the normal way through the soil. Do be patient. Hoya can get rather large. This one is just about 2 years old. But it does take time. They don't tend to be the really rapidly growing plants like some of your other vining plants. So be patient with your Hoya. And finally, just reiterating what I talked about before, don't overwater. Your plant will suffer more from overwatering than from the occasional underwater. Thank you for watching my video all about one of my very favorite genus, the Hoya. If you enjoyed any aspect of this video, please give it a thumbs up and remember to hit that subscribe button so that you can stay tuned for all of my planty content. Remember, next week I'll be back with another video where I give you a tour of my Hoya collection. Until next time, my planty friends, let's keep growing together a greener world.